Eastern France, autumn 1944. The rain has not stopped for 3 days. Mud swallows boots. Engines cough in the cold. On a narrow country road near Nancy, a column of American Sherman tanks grinds forward. Metal monsters wearing the grime of war. Their tracks churn the earth like waves. Steady, relentless. In the tree line, German engineers watch from the wreck of a Panther. They take notes quietly, water dripping from their helmets. The Sherman is smaller, thinner, less threatening, yet somehow it keeps moving. Their own machines, heavier, stronger, masterpieces of steel, lie abandoned behind them, victims not of enemy fire, but of exhaustion and breakdown. The engineers can't understand it. How could something so ordinary keep winning? How could an enemy tank, built faster and simpler, survive where their perfect designs failed? They will try to copy it. They will study its armor, its gun, its gears, believing its power lies in the steel. But what they will never grasp is that the Sherman's deadliest weapon wasn't made of metal at all. The story of the Sherman tank begins long before it rolled across Normandy. It begins in the desperate years when the world's armies were still learning what mechanized war truly meant. In 1939, Europe was on fire. Germany's lightning-fast blitzkrieg had stunned the world. A new form of warfare that combined tanks, aircraft, and mobile infantry into a single, devastating force. The panzer divisions tore through Poland, then France, with a precision that seemed almost mechanical. Their tanks, the Panzer III and I-4, were not invincible, but they were efficient, coordinated, and backed by a doctrine that prized speed and shock over raw strength. To the Allies watching from afar, it seemed as if the Germans had mastered modern war. Each tank attack was choreographed, supported by radio communication, artillery, and relentless momentum. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, it faced a terrifying truth. Its armored forces were outdated, its doctrine untested. The U.S. had to learn, and learn fast. But instead of chasing perfection, American designers asked a different question. What could win a global war, not just a single battle? The answer became the M4 Sherman. Built not as a duelist, but as a survivor, the Sherman embodied the American approach to industrial war. It was fast, simple to produce, easy to repair, and reliable across climates. Its armor was moderate, its gun serviceable, but it could be built in numbers Germany could scarcely imagine. By 1943, American factories had become the new battlefields. Detroit's assembly lines roared day and night, pouring out tanks the way Ford once made cars. Engineers traded complexity for consistency. A single Sherman could be repaired with parts from another. Crews could swap engines, turrets, and tracks in hours. It was the first truly modular tank of the modern age. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, German design philosophy was following a different path, one shaped by precision, pride, and the pursuit of engineering perfection. Each new tank was a masterpiece, handcrafted with tight tolerances and intricate mechanics. The Panther and Tiger were monuments of metal, their armor thick, their guns unmatched. Yet with every refinement came fragility. These tanks demanded meticulous maintenance, rare materials, and expert crews. When they broke down, and they often did, they became immovable fortresses. Stranded in the mud, they were meant to conquer. The Americans saw something else, a chance to overwhelm complexity with simplicity. In the same time it took Germany to build one Tiger, the U.S. could field 6 Shermans and still have spare parts left for the next offensive. The numbers were staggering. By the end of the war, nearly 50,000 Shermans would be produced, an industrial feat unlike anything seen before or since. But this was not just about factories. It was about philosophy. The Sherman was a tank designed for the soldier, not the engineer. It prioritized the lives of its crew through reliability, escape hatches, and repairability, features often dismissed by German designers as inelegant. In the vast logistics web behind the front lines, repair depots, transport columns, mechanics working under lantern light, the Sherman's true secret began to take shape. A secret Germany could never copy because it wasn't built in metal or forged in steel. It lived in the system that supported it, a living network of industry, planning, and adaptation. If stories like this move you, consider subscribing. We'd also love to know, where in the world are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments now. Let's see how this clash of philosophies played out on the brutal battlefields of North Africa and Italy. By the spring of 1943, Germany had entered the second act of its armored war. The early triumphs of Blitzkrieg were fading. The Eastern Front was devouring machines faster than factories could replace them. And in the West, a new kind of enemy was gathering strength. Not one defined by brilliance or daring, but by endurance. When the first M4 Shermans arrived in North Africa, German crews mocked them. They called them Tommy Cookers, believing their thin armor and gasoline engines made them death traps. In head-to-head duels, a Tiger or Panther could destroy a Sherman long before the American tank could reply. Yet as the months passed, something unexpected happened. The Shermans kept coming back. At Kasserine Pass, El Alamein, and later in Italy, Allied units learned that the true measure of a tank was not how many it could kill, but how many could fight again tomorrow. For every Tiger lost, another might take months to replace. For every Sherman lost, 3 more could roll off the ships within days, repaired, recrewed, and ready. The German engineers watching from their workshops couldn't understand it. They captured several Shermans for analysis, stripping them to the bolts. They measured the thickness of the armor, the angle of the glacis, the power of the engine. They studied the 75 mm gun and compared it to their own high-velocity cannons. Nothing stood out. The materials were ordinary. The machining was crude by German. Standards reports sent back to Berlin called it technically inferior, lacking refinement, and primitive. But that primitive machine was changing the balance of the war, because while Germany built tanks for performance, the United States built for presence. Every Sherman that arrived on the battlefield carried behind it a network of ships, trucks, railways, and men, a logistical lifeline stretching across oceans. When a Sherman broke down, it wasn't abandoned. It was towed, repaired, and returned to combat in days. When a Tiger broke down, it was a monument of lost labor, too heavy to move, too rare to replace. The German command began to feel the strain. Factories in Kassel and Nibelungenwerk were working beyond capacity, their supply chains strangled by Allied bombing. The precision tools that gave the Panther its accuracy also slowed its production. Each tank required skilled craftsmen, the kind of men Germany was rapidly losing to the front. By contrast, American factories operated on a standardization model. A Sherman engine made in Michigan could fit into a hull made in Pennsylvania. A transmission from Chrysler could replace one from Ford. It was a system designed not for beauty, but for survival. In 1943, the Germans attempted to imitate this model. They studied Sherman's casting process and modular components, trying to simplify their own designs. But their industrial mindset resisted compromise. The Tiger II, introduced in 1944, was even heavier, even more complex. A technical marvel, but a logistical nightmare. Each new tank reflected a belief that power came from superiority. But the Americans understood that power came from continuity. A tank that moved, fought, broke, and was repaired again. That was the true measure of strength. As the war pressed toward Normandy, the difference between those philosophies would soon decide the fate of armies. One side would field machines designed for mastery. The other would unleash a machine built for endurance. And in that clash of steel, of will, of ideology, the Sherman's secret would finally reveal itself. The distant thunder of Normandy is approaching. Soon, those same German engineers who once mocked the Sherman will face an ocean of them. They will watch as their own designs crumble, not from enemy shells, but from the weight of their own perfectionism. The stage is set for the confrontation that will expose the truth behind the Sherman's hidden power. Inside a Sherman, war felt different. It was cramped, noisy, unbearably hot, but it was alive. Crews trusted their machines because they knew them intimately. The Sherman was simple enough for soldiers to fix with basic tools: wrenches, welding torches, spare bolts scrounged from wrecks. In the mud of Normandy or the cold forests of the Ardennes, this simplicity meant survival. A broken track could be repaired in an hour. A damaged gun sight could be replaced with a part from another tank. Crews often named their Shermans Thunderbolt, Fireball, Lucky Lady, because these machines became more than steel. They were companions that brought them home again and again. German crews, by contrast, fought in marvels of engineering that demanded constant care. A Panther could take hours to start on a cold morning. A Tiger's gearbox might seize after only a few kilometers. To drive one was to serve it, not command it. And in that difference lay the first secret. The Sherman wasn't the best tank of the war. It was the tank built for the men who fought it. On paper, the Sherman should have been outmatched. The Panther's long 75mm gun could destroy it from over a kilometer away. The Tiger's 80mm cannon could pierce its armor with ease. But the Americans didn't fight on paper. They fought with doctrine. Each Sherman was part of a larger symphony: infantry, artillery, and air power working in concert. Where a German tank might hunt alone, an American Sherman fought as part of a system. Artillery could suppress enemy tanks before contact. Fighter bombers like the P-47 Thunderbolt could strike from above. Infantry supported the Shermans through villages, spotting ambushes and protecting flanks. In this combined arms environment, the Sherman didn't have to win every duel. It just had to stay in the fight long enough for the rest of the machine to do its work. The Germans, meanwhile, were trapped in their own expectations. Their tanks were designed to dominate duels, not sustain campaigns. Each Panther needed supply convoys of fuel, spare parts, and mechanics just to remain operational. The Americans had none of those burdens. Their tanks consumed less, moved faster, and could traverse terrain the heavier German beasts could not. The battlefield was no longer about who had the sharpest sword, but who could keep swinging it. That was where the Sherman thrived. From an engineer's point of view, the Sherman was both humble and brilliant. Its welded hull and cast turret design allowed rapid production using existing automobile manufacturing techniques. The radial engine, derived from aircraft designs, provided reliability and power with fewer moving parts. Everything about the Sherman reflected intention. Its gun was chosen not for sheer penetration, but for balance, accuracy, rate of fire, and ease of maintenance. Its tracks were designed for quick replacement. Its turret ring was standardized across models, allowing for future upgrades like the 76mm high-velocity gun or the British Firefly conversion. To the German eye, this looked like mediocrity, but to the American planner, it was genius. Each Sherman that rolled off the line could be serviced by anyone trained to repair a car. Behind that simplicity was an invisible army. hundreds of thousands of factory workers, many of them women, assembling parts that would fit together anywhere on Earth. This was not engineering as art. It was engineering as democracy. The Panther might have been a masterpiece, but the Sherman was a movement, the embodiment of an industrial world that had learned to fight as one organism. By the summer of 1944, this difference was beginning to show. In workshops behind the lines, Shermans were being patched up faster than German intelligence could report their destruction. Every time a tank returned to combat, it reminded the Germans of a truth they could not ignore. The enemy wasn't just building tanks. He was building a system that refused to stop. And soon, that system would collide head-on with the most fearsome armored forces in Europe. A clash not of guns and armor, but of philosophies. One driven by precision, the other by purpose. By 1944, the American home front had become an industrial battlefield of its own. Factories across the United States hummed without rest. Ford in Michigan, Chrysler in Detroit, Fisher Body in Cleveland, each transforming peacetime machinery into weapons of war. The numbers were staggering. Every month, hundreds of new Shermans rolled from assembly lines and onto trains bound for ports. The U.S. didn't just build tanks, it built the ecosystem around them. Spare engines, transmissions, tracks, and repair kits, all standardized, all waiting in vast depots. When a Sherman was lost in France, another arrived within weeks. When one broke down, a maintenance team had it running again within hours. The American system was designed around the assumption that machines would fail, and that men would need them back quickly. Germany, meanwhile, was trapped in its own brilliance. Its tanks were assembled in smaller batches, each one unique in tolerances and fittings. Panther production was slowed by shortages of ball bearings and specialized steel. Bombing raids crippled transport networks and power grids. Each Tiger that left the factory floor represented months of effort. Each failure an irreplaceable loss. Even as engineers tried to copy the Sherman's efficiency, their own industry couldn't support it. Precision was their pride. But in total war, perfection became their enemy. At the highest levels of command, two very different philosophies guided the war. For the German high command, the tank was a symbol, a weapon of prestige, designed to dominate through fear and firepower. Hitler himself took personal interest in tank development, demanding constant improvements. Thicker armor, bigger guns, higher performance. Each order delayed production and fragmented designs. The Tiger II, introduced late in the war, was a marvel that arrived too late and in too few numbers to change anything. On the Allied side, leadership was pragmatic. Generals like Eisenhower and Patton didn't ask for perfection. They asked for availability. Patton famously said, "A good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan next week." That philosophy extended to the Sherman. It wasn't about individual performance, but about momentum, the ability to keep moving forward, no matter the setbacks. When tanks bogged down in hedgerows, engineers welded steel prongs onto the fronts. The Rhino modification, within days. When German Panthers outgunned the Shermans, the U.S. and British armies adapted by fielding Firefly variants and improved ammunition. This agility, this refusal to wait for perfection, became one of the Allies' most lethal weapons. While German leaders obsessed over blueprints, the Americans changed the battlefield itself. For German engineers, the war became a nightmare of their own making. They were men who believed in mastery, that every problem could be solved through superior craftsmanship. But by 1944, their work was being undone not by Allied shells, but by the cold math of attrition. Reports from the front painted a grim picture. Panther units entering combat with only half their tanks operational. Tiger divisions stranded without fuel. Mechanics stripping wrecks just to keep a handful running. The psychological toll was immense. They knew their tanks were better, and yet they were losing. It was a truth that defied everything they had been taught. Meanwhile, on the Allied side, confidence was growing. Sherman crews knew the odds, but they also knew the system behind them. They trusted that if their tank fell, another would take its place, that they were part of something larger. The German crews, isolated and outnumbered, began to feel the opposite. Each tank was precious, irreplaceable. Every loss was personal. Every breakdown felt like betrayal. By late 1944, the myth of technological superiority was collapsing. The engineers who once dismissed the Sherman as crude were now facing a truth more devastating than defeat. The enemy had built a weapon that couldn't be out-engineered, because it was built around people, not perfection. The contrast could not have been sharper. As Allied convoys landed endless waves of Shermans on French beaches, German production lines fell silent under Allied bombs. What began as a competition of machines had become a race of endurance, one that Germany was doomed to lose. But the true test of these machines and the philosophies behind them was yet to come. On the fields of Normandy, where the mud, the weather, and the will of men would decide which tank truly ruled the war. Normandy, France, June 1944. The invasion had begun. For months, German engineers had studied the Atlantic Wall, confident that their steel and concrete would stop the Allies at the beaches. But when the first waves of American and British armor rolled inland, they brought with them something the Germans had never faced in such scale: movement that never stopped. The M4 Sherman, thousands of them, landed on the shores of Omaha, Utah, and Gold Beaches. Their green hulls glistened with seawater, their crews shaken but unbroken. Many drowned before even reaching land, yet the tide of metal kept coming. By June 10th, entire armored columns were pushing through Normandy's hedgerows. Each field became a trap. Narrow lanes, hidden guns, ambushes waiting behind every wall of earth. Here, the Panther and Tiger were in their element. Their guns tore through Shermans at terrifying distances. In the first days, entire Allied tank platoons vanished in smoke and fire. But something unexpected happened. Even after devastating losses, the Shermans came back. Day after day, new tanks replaced the fallen. Crews reformed. Mechanics worked through the night under the dim glow of lanterns, welding, refitting, cannibalizing wrecks for parts. The Germans, watching from their positions, couldn't believe it. Every Panther destroyed was irreplaceable. Every Tiger burned was a tragedy. Yet the Shermans multiplied like shadows at dawn. It wasn't just numbers. It was the rhythm of replacement, the relentless pulse of an army that refused to pause. On June 13th, near the village of Villers-Bocage, the German ace Michael Wittmann led a Tiger I ambush that wiped out an entire British column in minutes. The devastation was shocking, a reminder of what German engineering could do. But within days, the British regrouped, their losses replenished from reserves. For every moment of German brilliance, the Allies answered with endurance. Behind the front lines, the difference became even clearer. German workshops were quiet, short of fuel, spare parts, and time. American depots, meanwhile, buzzed with life. Cranes lifting damaged hulls, trucks delivering engines, repair crews covered in oil and dust. One Sherman could return to battle 3 times before a German tank could even be replaced. The Allies were not winning because of superior tanks. They were winning because their system could absorb loss. For German commanders, this was incomprehensible. They saw war as a contest of quality, but the Americans had turned it into a science of quantity, logistics, and adaptability. Each Panther that bogged down in mud became a symbol of misplaced pride. Too heavy for its own bridges, too complex for its own crews. Each Sherman that clawed forward through the hedgerows proved that reliability was a weapon in itself. The psychological balance was shifting. German soldiers who once looked down on the Sherman began to dread its persistence. Destroy one, and another appeared within hours. The battlefield itself seemed to conspire against them. Endless supply columns, endless replacements, endless Shermans. For the first time, German tank crews began to whisper a quiet truth. They were not fighting men. They were fighting a machine that could not stop. As July turned to August, the Allies prepared for the breakout operation that would decide the campaign. Operation Cobra. By now, the Panther's reputation as a superior tank meant little to the men who had to fuel, fix, and transport them. Many units reached the front with fewer than half their vehicles running. Meanwhile, the Americans had more Shermans than they had roads to drive them on. The momentum that had once belonged to Blitzkrieg was gone, reclaimed by the very enemy Germany had once mocked for being industrial and unimaginative. The battlefield was no longer an arena of tank aces. It had become an assembly line of destruction and rebirth. And in that rhythm, the Sherman revealed its true power. The power to turn the chaos of war into organized persistence. But the decisive blow, the moment when the German war machine finally broke under the weight of its own perfection, was still to come. Normandy, July 25, 1944. The air trembled. Thousands of Allied bombers roared overhead, releasing a storm of fire on German positions west of St. Lo. The ground shook as waves of explosions tore through hedgerows and fields. Operation Cobra had begun, a plan to shatter the German defensive line and open the road to France. Below, the Shermans waited. Engines idled. Crews stared at the horizon, their faces illuminated by the flashes of bombing miles ahead. The moment the barrage stopped, the order came. Advance. The landscape that followed was a nightmare. Cratered fields, burning trees, smoke curling into the morning sky. But the Shermans moved, slow at first, then faster, pushing through the wreckage. Panthers and Tigers tried to resist, but the battlefield had changed. The skies belonged to the Allies. P-47 Thunderbolts strafed from above, rockets finding the weak roofs of German armor. Every time a Tiger fired, its muzzle flash betrayed its position. And seconds later, bombs fell. German formations collapsed under pressure not from superior tanks, but from the weight of an unstoppable system. The Shermans weren't winning by killing faster, they were winning by not stopping. When one was hit, another filled the gap. When a bridge was destroyed, engineers built a new one overnight. Every part of the Allied advance moved in sync. Tanks, trucks, repair crews, fuel convoys, air cover, medics, a machine of war operating with the precision Germany once prided itself on, but now could only watch in disbelief. In the chaos of retreat, the weaknesses of the German giants were laid bare. The Panther's engine overheated after hours of sustained marching. Its transmission failed under strain. The Tiger's immense weight tore apart rural roads and bridges, leaving them stranded. German reports from the front described an army trapped by its own machines. Tanks out of fuel, too valuable to abandon, too heavy to tow. Commanders were forced to destroy their own vehicles to prevent capture. Meanwhile, Allied tankers joked grimly that their greatest advantage was spare parts and coffee. They could fight all day, rest for an hour, and fight again by dawn. Even the wounded Shermans returned to life, patched, repainted, rearmed. By early August, the breakout became a flood. American columns fanned out across the French countryside, moving faster than German headquarters could track. Town after town fell, resistance crumbling before the sheer scale of mobility. On August 7th, the Germans launched a desperate counterattack near Mortain, sending their last operational Panthers and Tigers into the fray. They struck hard, breaking through initial lines, but fuel shortages, broken transmissions, and relentless Allied airstrikes turned the attack into disaster. Within days, the German armored spearhead was surrounded and destroyed. It was here that the truth finally became undeniable. The Sherman's deadly secret wasn't its gun, its armor, or its size. It was its ability to keep fighting when others could not. The American system, the coordination of industry, logistics, and human ingenuity had achieved something even the most brilliant. German engineers could never replicate sustainability under pressure. Captured German reports from that summer spoke of frustration and disbelief. One commander wrote, "The enemy replaces his losses faster than we can count ours." Another noted, "Their tanks are not superior, but they never stop arriving." The very thing the Germans once mocked, the Sherman's simplicity, had become the weapon that outlasted their genius. By mid-August, the Falaise pocket closed around tens of thousands of German troops. The once mighty panzer divisions, crippled by breakdowns and encirclement, ceased to exist as an effective force. In their wake, the roads were littered with wrecks, burned Tigers, overturned Panthers, machines too advanced for the war they fought. And still, the Shermans rolled on, through the villages of Normandy, across the rivers of France, toward Paris, toward the Rhine, toward the heart of a collapsing empire. The world had witnessed the final triumph of practicality over perfection. The Sherman had revealed its secret at last. The war wasn't won by the strongest tank, but by the one that never stopped moving. The guns would soon fall silent, but the echoes of that revelation, that a machine's power lies in its endurance, not its glory, would shape warfare for generations. The war was turning, and now the consequences of that turning point were about to reshape the world. The breakout from Normandy shattered the illusion of German invincibility. By the end of August 1944, the Allies had liberated Paris. Columns of Shermans rolled down the Champs-Élysées beneath cheering crowds, battered, scarred, yet still running. For many, these tanks had traveled hundreds of miles without rest, patched and repainted dozens of times. Some had survived direct hits, rebuilt again and again from salvaged parts. They were more than machines now. They were symbols of endurance. Behind that victory, however, lay a stark truth. The German armored corps was dying not in battle, but in the factories and fields of Europe. At Kassel, Nibelungenwerk, and Henschel, once proud centers of German engineering, production had slowed to a crawl. Allied bombing campaigns targeted not just factories, but the fragile arteries that fed them. Oil refineries, rail lines, bridges. Without fuel, even the finest tank became a fortress of steel and dust. Reports from late 1944 revealed the scale of collapse. Entire panzer divisions were listed as paper formations, existing in name only. In contrast, the United States was producing tanks faster than it could ship them. By autumn, thousands of Shermans sat in depots waiting for transport, each one a reserve for a war that was already tilting toward its end. The numbers told a story more decisive than any single battle. For every Tiger that reached the front, 20 Shermans waited across the channel. For every Panther lost, 3 more Shermans rolled into the next fight. Germany's obsession with precision had built masterpieces, but America's devotion to practicality had built momentum, and momentum had become destiny. On the front lines, that difference translated into survival. When a Sherman was hit, the crew often lived. Quick hatch escape routes, internal fire suppression, and accessible design features saved thousands of lives. Many of those same crews returned to new tanks within days, a continuity of experience that no German unit could match. In contrast, when a Tiger burned, its crew was often trapped inside. Fuel shortages forced commanders to abandon disabled tanks in open terrain, destroying them to prevent capture. Every lost machine carried months of work and the loss of irreplaceable expertise. As the Allies pressed toward the German border, the Panther's flaws became undeniable. Its powerful gun and sloped armor mattered little when its engines overheated or its transmissions failed. Mechanics scavenged wrecks to keep a handful operational, but the tide was unstoppable. What had once been the pride of German design now symbolized futility. Magnificent, but doomed. In the Ardennes, during the Battle of the Bulge, this truth was made final. Germany's last great armored offensive began with over 400 tanks. Within weeks, most were destroyed or immobilized, starved of fuel and spare parts. The Sherman, lighter and more adaptable, thrived even in the freezing snow. It carried American and Allied forces through the forests, into towns, across rivers, and toward the Rhine. The war's balance had shifted permanently. The tank that Germany once mocked now defined the battlefield. The Sherman's deadly secret had revealed itself not in armor or firepower, but in resilience. It was a machine built for a long war, not for glory, but for victory through endurance. Yet even as the Allies advanced, a strange respect lingered. Captured German officers often expressed bewildered admiration for the scale and efficiency of Allied production. Some admitted quietly that they had underestimated the enemy's will, the invisible weapon that had powered every Sherman that reached the front. By 1945, the war's outcome was no longer in doubt. Germany's tanks were fighting ghosts, shadows of an army that had already moved past them. But for the men inside those Shermans, victory was not triumph. It was survival. Every cratered road, every burned-out field was a reminder that even endurance comes at a human cost. The guns would fall silent soon, but before peace could return, one more reckoning awaited. A final collapse that would bury not just Germany's tanks, but the very idea that perfection could win a modern war. By the winter of 1945, the war in Europe was burning itself out. The German army, once unstoppable, was now a shattered remnant, retreating through ruined cities and frozen forests. The once mighty Tiger and Panther tanks stood silent in the snow, abandoned where they broke down or ran dry. Photographs from those final months tell the story better than any report. In one image, a Tiger II rests half-sunk in mud, its tracks torn away, its crew long gone. In another, a column of Shermans rumbles through a shattered village, engines humming, tracks clattering over cobblestones. Behind them march soldiers, tired but moving forward. That contrast defined the end of the European war. One machine built to endure, the other built to impress. When the Allies crossed the Rhine in March 1945, German resistance collapsed. Factories were rubble, fuel reserves gone. Engineers who had once argued about armor thickness were now fleeing west, desperate to surrender before the Soviets arrived. In those final weeks, even Hitler's orders to build more Tigers sounded like echoes from another world. Commands to an empire that no longer had the means to obey. The German war machine, built on precision and pride, had consumed itself. Meanwhile, the Sherman kept rolling. From Normandy to the Ruhr, it had become a constant presence, a tool of liberation. a symbol of unstoppable motion. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't invincible, but it was everywhere. And when the war finally ended in May 1945, the Sherman didn't retire. It continued to serve across the world, in Korea, in Israel, in the deserts and jungles of the Cold War. Its design philosophy lived on, shaping generations of tanks that followed. Machines built to move, survive, and be repaired, not to stand as monuments to pride. In post-war Germany, engineers studying Allied equipment made a humbling discovery. They found that the Sherman's true genius wasn't just in its mechanics, it was in its system. Every part of the tank, from its interchangeable components to its field manuals, was designed with logistics in mind. It was the first tank built for a global supply chain. This insight would influence even the German Leopard tanks of later decades. Sleek, efficient, and maintainable, but grounded in the same lesson. Endurance wins wars. For the men who had fought inside the Sherman, that endurance came with a price. Thousands never returned, but many more lived because their machines gave them a chance. Escape hatches that worked, engines that restarted, armor that bought just enough time. In war, survival itself can be victory. The Panther, Tiger, and King Tiger became legends, museum pieces, revered for their design. The Sherman became something else, a symbol of the ordinary turned extraordinary. Its secret, the deadly one Germany could never copy, was not a hidden technology or superior alloy. It was the realization that wars are not won by machines, but by systems and the people who keep them running. That philosophy would shape not just future wars, but the modern world. Factories that once built tanks would turn to cars and tractors. The same logistics networks that fed the front would later feed nations. The discipline of production and repair would evolve into a new kind of power, economic, not military. Germany had sought perfection. America had built persistence. And in that difference, the 20th century was decided. When the guns fell silent, the wrecks of both sides rusted in the rain. But the ideas they represented endured. The Sherman's spirit, adaptable, repairable, unbreakable, became a quiet legacy that still echoes through the machines we build today. The fields of Europe grew quiet again. Where once engines roared, now only the wind moved through the grass. Among the rusting wrecks, Panthers, Tigers, and Shermans alike, a silence settled that no machine could ever break. History would remember the German tanks for their power, their precision, their terror. But history would respect the Sherman, not for what it destroyed, but for what it endured. Its legacy was not written in the number of kills or the thickness of armor, but in the survival of its crews, in the rebuilding of nations, and in the idea that practicality could triumph over pride. It was proof that in war, as in life, perfection means little if it cannot last. Every Sherman that crossed a battlefield carried a simple truth. Strength is not found in the steel itself, but in the hands that repair it, the minds that sustain it, and the hearts that refuse to stop moving forward. The men who built it, drove it, and fixed it understood something their enemies never did, that progress is not a product of genius alone, but of collaboration. A tank that anyone could maintain became a weapon everyone could rely on. And long after the last battle was fought, that philosophy outlived the war. It shaped industries, nations, and the very rhythm of modern life. The power of systems that endure, of tools made not for glory, but for continuity. The Sherman story is, in the end, a story of humanity itself, imperfect, resilient, and unyielding. It reminds us that survival is often the most extraordinary victory of all. The ocean remembers everything, and so do we. Subscribe to WW Tales Stories and join us as we uncover more untold moments of courage and loss. What part of this story struck you most? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read your take.